So I'm going to start off with a visualization here of kind of what we've been talking about, this whole how that we do a little proposing a modification to how the NEPA triangle looks. Because the whole idea here is to, even though we're going to spend some more time up front and doing that landscape, Kelly, this will look familiar to you, obviously, because we developed this talking through in a different project. The idea here is to utilize this landscape evaluation process and this collaborative involvement early in the process so that we're spending time out here more time out here, and quickly getting up here, and then having the idea to have the analysis side be shorter and faster so that we get to implementation quicker. So that's kind of a visualization of how I would, by using this approach of trying to speed things up and kind of change the shape of how our triangle looks. So I'll just touch on a little bit of detail here about the project, the Upper Wenatchee pilot project. Once again, this is a pilot project, so it's trying some more different things. It's a 75,000 acre project area. It's developed in partnership with the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative, made up with members of timber industry, conservation groups, Department of Natural Resources from the state, tribal governments, all kinds of involvement here. So we're looking at a 4 sub-watershed project area. Of course, got all the good project resource values to deal with. We have steelhead and chinook, bull trout, gray wolf, grizzly bear, spotted owl, all kinds of good stuff thrown in there into the project area to work through. So here's the starting point of what we started off with for project goals and objectives from the landscape evaluation process. I won't read through all these. You can just kind of take a look at those, looking at, obviously addressing conditions that departed from HRV, promoting better outcomes for a broad spectrum of resources and values. But then what I really want to touch on is really the next part is the big important part of this is the effective model for collaboration in this process. And then what we're trying to get to is that second part really is the collaborative planning effort that increases the shared stewardship over the forest, and then creates that in turn creates that greater support that's needed for us to implement these actions on the landscape. So I have a diagram here so this is a pilot project. This is also another contract NEPA project. So we have a contractor involved with this. I mentioned this during when I was in the panel up here earlier, just talking about these terrestrial and aquatic work groups. These were set up by the collaborative to have that early collaborative engagement through this landscape evaluation process. And it was really great to have them involved because, you have Trout Unlimited, you have all these other organizations that all have resource specialists, and so they have all these. It's another opportunity to get other ideas and things that perhaps we haven't thought of, to bring into this, bring into the planning process. So just another way to gain efficiency and hopefully end up with a better project, a better outcome by having that input up front. Then of course that fed into development of purpose and need. Our purpose and need statements from that. Once again, they're kind of similar, obviously, just kind of fed in just like for what you mentioned on the Willamette, how some of these just kind of carried over. You'll see some similarity from what the goals we started out with and what our purpose and needs turned out to be. Some similarity there in those. I'll also throw one other thing in here that's kind of related, but different approach, just about that this is also a condition-based project. So we're using what we call a flexible toolbox approach. So it's a condition-based management strategy that allows some predetermined treatments to be aligned prior to implementation with what the current conditions are on the ground. So for example, with vegetation treatments, a combination of selection criteria and veg conditions would be used to determine habitat and forest cover filters and modifiers, and then as well as appropriate treatments for each of those. With that flexible toolbox approach, We'd have a suite of potential treatment types and intensities to be proposed and analyzed as a response to specific resource conditions. Then, of course, there would be additional field review conducted later before implementation, then using that ground-based information, the most appropriate treatments within those analyzed sideboards would be used to move resources towards the desired conditions in the appropriate locations. So some things about also kind of some wrap-up things here. Why invest in doing this work up front? A couple of these I mentioned earlier. Obviously, depending on how you do this, you could have use a landscape evaluation to end up with multiple projects from multiple decisions from one landscape evaluation. Purpose and need statements better supported with landscape and patch level information. That better integration across resources. A focused project design. By also reducing some of those potential unresolved conflicts and limiting and helping maybe focusing in on your alternative development. Treatment options could be modeled to show potential outcomes and effects. And these last two are really important, I think, for the early involvement in the planning process adds value to our collaborative group members. It also helps them understand, because they're more become involved with our process, it helps them have more ownership in it and begin to understand kind of, we can tell them all the time about what the challenges that we have in our planning process, but when we get them involved, then they start to understand that and help us work through those. And then that extensive engagement then really helps to ensure that those objectives are then supported through the process when we go into implementation, that we have that. By taking that extra time to have them engaged, then that increases the likelihood of our success because we have engaged them and they have we end up with having additional support for getting stuff implemented. And that's the end of what I had. Any questions?
Questions for these gentlemen? Yes, Hannah.
So to what extent are you using geovisualization to engage your stakeholders and educate them? That relates to the question that the panelist asked about how can you bridge that complexity of the situation with the planning process and engaging your stakeholders. I think geovisualization is probably an important tool. And what lessons we may have learned either in this project or the American project using those techniques to get stakeholders up to speed and understanding the issues.
Yeah, so the question is, to what extent we use geovisualization to share these processes, essentially communicate them with the public, and make forward progress. Is that correct? So for our projects, we've tried, I showed some of the visualizations from the stand structure, forest structure. That's about as far as we've taken it. It's a really challenging task given our current staffing levels. We've had Cheryl and I have had some work where we've tried to get that kind of spooled up and start creating some sort of a workflow to do that. But for the most part, it comes down to simple GIS discussions and a lot of interactions that can take a long time to basically communicate it. So not as much as we'd like is probably the answer, I would say.
One more.
Any other questions?
No.
Thank you.
So, okay. Thank you, guys.